Somewhere around 5,000 years ago, in a city called Uruk, in what's now southern Iraq, someone pressed a reed into wet clay to record a debt. Not a debt of money, a debt of beer. A worker had shown up, done a day's labor, and was owed a ration for it. And someone thought that fact was important enough to write down. That clay tablet is one of the oldest pieces of writing ever found. Before we had writing for poetry, before we had writing for religion, we had writing for one specific purpose, proving that a person had worked and was owed something for it. This is the story of how labor became something you could sell instead of something you were forced to give, and why that idea had to be invented at all. For most of human history, work didn't come with a price tag because it didn't need one. In small foraging bands, labor wasn't bought. It was simply what you did for people you'd known your entire life in exchange for a share of whatever the group produced. Once societies grew large enough to need labor from people outside the family, two very different answers emerged for how to get it. The first was slavery, labor taken from someone with no legal ability to refuse. The second is the one this video is about, labor freely offered in exchange for a payment both sides agree to. For most of early civilization, both options ran side by side, sometimes on the very same building project. The wage isn't the story of work beginning, it's the story of one specific alternative to owning the person doing it. Return to that tablet from Uruk. On it, a simple picture shows a human head bent over a bowl, the symbol for ration, next to a jar of beer, with tally marks counting out what a specific worker was owed. Beer wasn't a treat in Bronze Age Mesopotamia. It was thick, nutrient-dense, and safer to drink than the water, which made it one of the world's first payroll currencies. Temple and palace administrations across Mesopotamia and Egypt paid laborers building monuments and canals in standardized daily beer rations alongside bread and grain. Some of the largest state building projects handed out several liters a day, enough that historians have half-joked the ancient world's great monuments were built on payroll. What makes this different from slavery isn't the beer, it's the record-keeping. A slave doesn't need a receipt proving what they're owed, because they're owed nothing. Ownership doesn't require a receipt. But the moment a society starts tallying exactly how much a named worker has coming to them, it has invented something new. The idea that labor creates a debt the employer has to settle, not a possession the employer already holds. A few centuries later, Babylonian law did something no society had apparently done in writing before. The Code of Hammurabi set fixed payment rates for specific trades, enforced by the same legal system that handled property disputes and crime. As far as the written record shows, this is among the earliest minimum wage law in human history. A minimum wage law only makes sense in a world where wages already exist, where they're already being negotiated low enough that a king feels the need to step in. By Hammurabi's era, the wage was infrastructure, common enough and contested enough to legislate. Craftsmen, boatmen, harvest laborers all had rates the law was willing to set and defend, which tells you these weren't rare arrangements between a handful of specialists. They were common enough that an entire legal code needed an opinion on them. And once wages are law, something follows automatically. A wage only means something if it can be too low. Inventing paid labor is, in the same breath, inventing the underpaid worker. The two ideas arrive on the same clay tablet, centuries apart but permanently linked, because the moment you can be paid fairly, you can also be paid unfairly, and someone has to decide where that line sits. If you want proof that paid labor and owned labor produced two completely different kinds of workers, look at Deir el-Medina, a purpose-built village in New Kingdom Egypt, home to the artisans who built the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. These weren't slaves, they were skilled, free laborers, paid in monthly grain rations by the state. In the 29th year of the reign of Ramses III, around 1157 BCE, the payment system broke down. The grain that was supposed to arrive on schedule didn't. Local officials, distracted by preparations for the pharaoh's jubilee, let the delay stretch on. and the tomb builders did something a slave, structurally, cannot do. They stopped. They put down their tools and walked off the job, organized and public about exactly why. Surviving records describe the workers confronting officials directly, describing hunger, describing having no clothing or basic provisions, and demanding the grievance be carried all the way up to the vizier and the pharaoh himself. It worked, eventually, though only after they repeated the walkout when promised payments failed to arrive again. Historians generally treat this as the earliest documented labor strike in human history. That's not a coincidence. A strike is only possible when the workers' cooperation is something the employer has to keep earning, payment by payment, when withholding your labor is a form of leverage you're legally allowed to use. Slavery, by design, removes that leverage entirely. There's no version of a strike for someone who is owned. Refusal isn't leverage in that arrangement, it's just punished. The wage created the one thing slavery structurally cannot create: a worker with something to withhold and a system that has to notice when they withhold it. It's worth remembering these workers weren't building something ordinary. They were constructing the tombs of pharaohs, the most sacred labor in their entire civilization, work tied directly to the king's journey into the afterlife. And even that didn't stop them from stopping. If wage leverage could shut down work on a pharaoh's own tomb, it could shut down almost anything. Once paid labor existed as a legal category, it spread. Skilled trades across Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, and Rome increasingly ran on daily or task-based pay rather than binding a worker permanently to one household. But the wages history from here isn't simply a story of steady progress. Researchers studying wage data across Egypt and Mesopotamia over roughly 2,000 years have found that real wages for unskilled labor actually declined significantly over that stretch, even as populations became more mobile and labor markets more interconnected. More workers competing for the same jobs across a wider region didn't automatically mean better pay. Often it meant the opposite: wages drifting toward a lower common level rather than lifting upward. That's worth sitting with because it undercuts the tidy version of this story where inventing the wage was simply progress, and progress kept improving from there. The wage solved one problem. It gave workers a form of leverage ownership never allowed. It left a second problem wide open. Leverage only works if there's genuine competition for your labor, and every society since Uruk has had employers looking for ways to make sure there isn't. This is the part of the story that rarely makes it into the shorter version. Most retellings stop at the invention, the moment beer became a payslip, the moment a law set a fair rate, and treat that as the finish line. But an invention isn't a guarantee. Inventing the wage didn't lock in fairness, just like inventing private property didn't lock in ownership staying with the people who worked the land. Both ideas had to be fought for again in every generation by people who had no way of knowing the fight had already been going on for thousands of years before they were born. So when a payment lands in an account today, it's carrying an idea that's roughly 5,000 years old, older than most of the empires in this channel's catalog, older than most written law itself. Before there were words for justice or kingship recorded in clay, there was a tally of beer owed to a worker who had earned it. The wage didn't end the older option. Slavery and paid labor ran side by side for most of recorded history, sometimes on the very same construction site, which is worth remembering the next time getting paid at all is treated as the end of the conversation rather than the beginning of one. The wage bought workers something ownership can never grant: the power to say no. What they've had to keep fighting for, from Deir el-Medina to now, is making that no actually mean something.